Hi everyone. Today we're starting a new series looking at the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. And I don't plan to look at every single verse through these, but kind of hit the highlights of these important books. So 1st and 2nd Samuel are historical books, and really they're focused on this question of whether or not having a king is good for Israel or not. And there's not a simple answer of yes or no in Scripture to that question. There's positives to it, and there's a lot of negatives. And so what we see in the biblical books is that this is a conversation that's going on between different voices and different traditions across time. There's not a definitive single take. And in Samuel, these questions are really answered through three different characters. You have Samuel himself, the prophet and judge, who starts the book and really is of the view that God alone is meant to be Israel's king. And then you have Saul, the first king in Israel, who basically is just a failure. He starts out okay, but it doesn't go well pretty quick. And then we have David, the replacement king, kind of seen as the true king, who in some ways is the best king Israel had, but is also a pretty complicated guy. His reign is troubled, and there's some issues with his character. But, I don't know, a lot of us probably have the interpretation of this story that David's the hero. He's the good guy. He's the man after God's own heart, after all. And that's who we're supposed to be like, right? I mean, aside from that whole thing with Bathsheba. Well, David, like I said, is always a bit more complicated than that. Which leads us to ask about, what is this book actually meant to do? What's the focus? Who are we looking at here? Often the ways that books like this are taught is moralistic, right? So be like David, right? When he went up against Goliath, you should be brave like he was brave. Or don't be like Saul and trust in these other things and go against God. That's okay, but really the focus should be theological. We should be learning what God is like, what God cares about, who cares about. What does this story reveal about God? Sometimes that's very clear, sometimes it's not, because God isn't always coming in and saying, giving, a positive or negative take on things. But I think we see this if we look at who does God lift up, who does God stick with even when they make mistakes. That tells us who God really is. Now, a few other background things as we start these books. Originally, 1st and 2nd Samuel were just one book. It's not meant to be divided up, but it's just too long to keep as one scroll. And so that means that since the character of Samuel dies in the first half of these two books, obviously he can't actually be the author, which is sometimes assumed. Instead, it's most likely that there were multiple authors or different traditions or different sources, and those were eventually collected and edited together. And most scholars think that happened during the time of the Babylonian exile, when the monarchy had basically been destroyed. And so this is a book that's about, it's addressing the current moment, right? History is never written in a vacuum. It's here they're asking, how do we get in this mess? How did the monarchy go wrong? And what is God doing with us now? We all always need to pay attention to history so that we can learn lessons from the past. But the most important lesson that we have to learn about the past is what it says about the God who is still present.